Okay, so welcome. This is the 11th class in the book called Beaker Chicago, or Touching a City's Soul, the collection of sichos on maamarim that the previous Rebbe said when he visited Chicago in 1942. We're on page 57. So if people have the book, they can open up to page 57 and follow along.
Just curious about something. The people in Chicago, I mean, you weren't there, I know, neither was I. But were there people on a level that they could understand what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying, that they had deep learning in Hasidus?
Well, there were some Chabad people identified themselves as Chabad Hasidim here. Rabbis came and laymen came. I'm sure there was a whole variety of people who came. One of them wrote memoirs about the time. That's at the end of the book.
Right. I did read through it. It was interesting.
Yeah. So you see from his description, there was like a whole variety of people who came, and there were different times. Sometimes there were like audiences for different groups of people. So I'm sure people understood however much they understood, to what extent they understood, just like we're understanding it to whatever extent we're understanding it,
No, I was just curious, whether there were people on like a high level of learning Hasidus in Chicago at that time, but I don't know. Maybe Mr. Moskowitz, Tzalangit Yaron would know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were rabbis coming for sure. Okay, so we're on page 57, section 3 of the Maimer, and what we were just talking about in the previous section was the idea that it says Hashem, Moshe is called a faithful shepherd, or a shepherd of faith, and how he and Abraham were both called doubly, like Moshe, Abraham. But that Moshe, when his name is double, there's no comma. When Avram's name is double, there is a comma, because Moshe's soul, the way it was in Atzilus, was the same way that it was down here in the physical world. So therefore, there's no like comma. It's one unit. Because he didn't need any rectification himself. He came down. It says that Moshe was perfect, that his whole purpose in coming down into the world was to receive the Torah and to teach it to us. Whereas Avraham, where it says Avram with the commas, because the manner that Avraham's soul manifested itself in Atzilus was different than the manner that it was in the physical world. And that's why Avram describes himself as dust and ashes. So that the same way that the ashes is made from the same stuff as the wood, but it doesn't look or behave like wood once it's ashes, even though it's actually the same material. So too, the soul of Abraham was different, up high and as it came down, it was different, and that's why Abraham called himself like ashes. So now we're going back to this section. We're going to go back and say, well, what was it like for Moshe? And then we're going to talk about two different sort of levels of souls, and what they're called, and what like a description of them, and what they sort of experience, I guess, of godliness in the physical world. Okay, so ready? Okay, so top of page 57. So, however, Moshe is read without a pause in the cancellation. There's no comma there, unlike with Abraham. Since Moshe and Atzilus and Moshe in the low worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah were identical without a break between them. Yeah, remember, the souls, there's 4 worlds, 4 spiritual worlds in the process of creation, like we mentioned last week. And Moshe's soul manifested itself the same way in all 4 levels, as opposed to Abraham's, which is what we were talking about last week. So Moshe received the Torah at Mount Sinai and taught it to all the Jewish people, and he drew down the inner flow of spiritual life force to the souls of the Jewish people. And it is for this reason that Moshe is written without a pause in the cancellation. In other words, He went up high, he came down low, he brought the up high, down low, no break in between, so there's no pause in the way that his name is said. Moshe, Moshe, Moshe up high, Moshe as manifested in this world, same thing. Until this point, the Rebbe Rayatz explained that Moshe Moshe is written without a pause in the cancellation because there was no change between his soul in its root, above in its root, and its manifestation below in the lower worlds. That's about Moshe personally. Until now, we were talking about Moshe personally. Now the Rebbe Rayatz, the Rebbe Rayatz is an acronym for, we usually call him the Frierdiker Rebbe, which means the previous Rebbe. The word Rebbe Rayatz is an acronym Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, or Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak, which is his name in Hebrew, like an acronym for his name in Hebrew. So it's the same person. Frierdiker Rebbe is in Yiddish, Rebbe Rayatz is in Hebrew. It refers, it's the same person. So now the Rebbe Rayatz adds a further point that as a result of this lack of change, Moshe was able to impart this quality to the Jewish people as well. Meaning he himself, there was no change between his soul above and his soul's manifestation. And to some extent, Moshe was able to impart this to the Jewish people as well. He was a leader, and remember in the beginning of the last section, we said he was the Raya Mehemna, he was the shepherd of faith. So I'm going to sort of start to talk about the different levels of souls and so on, and then connect it back. So it is written, behold, I will sow the house of Israel with the seed of man, the term Zera Adam, and the seed of animal, which is called Zera Behema. That's a quote from Yirmiyahu. The difference between humans and animals, if we're talking about the seed of a man and the seed of animal, the difference between humans and animals is that man has das, which they're translating here as introspective consciousness, and an animal does not have das. If you look at the footnote 20, it says the term das is difficult to translate precisely, as many terms are in Hebrew. Certainly terms that have sort of Kabbalistic and mystical Hasidic explanation because it's many layers of meaning. So it's sometimes translated as conscious awareness, meaning being aware of our thoughts, of our emotions, and of our actions. So in this context, they're translating it as introspective consciousness. You're going to see as we go deeper into the mimer, this is going to give us the ability to develop. Das is going to give us the ability to have our understanding affect our emotions. So humans have this quality of das, whereas animals don't have this quality of das. They don't have that ability. So too, concerning souls, there's different levels of souls. Zera Adam, which is the seed of man, are souls in the world of Atzilus, meaning there's two, just like there's two kinds of creations in the physical world, there's mankind and animal. In the spiritual world, there's also two types of souls. There's the souls of Atzilus, which are called the seed of man, and there's the souls that are going to be called the seed of animals. So what's the difference between them? So Zera Adam are souls of the worlds of Atzilus who are referred to as the children of the omnipresent. So Zera Adam, souls that are called Zera Adam, the seed of man, are from Atzilus, and they're called the children of the omnipresent. The omnipresent is one of the names of Hashem. In Hebrew, if you look at the Hebrew side, it says Makom, which literally translates as place. If you look at the footnote, he says Hashem is called the place because he's the place of the world, but the world is not his place, and no place is devoid of him. So another term for Hashem is place. So in other words, just like the superiority of man over animals is that he possesses das, understanding and feeling, right? Now he's adding that this idea of the introspective consciousness means understanding and feeling. We have to have both. That's what introspective consciousness means. So too, these souls have das in godliness. Meaning if we're talking about a soul having das, then we're talking about what is it that they have introspective consciousness about? It's about godliness. So there's physical people and physical animals, and the difference between them for our purposes here is that people have introspective consciousness and animals don't. And then there's souls that are called the souls of man and the souls of animals. And what's the difference between them is that the souls of man have introspective consciousness, which means understanding and feeling about godliness. However, the Zera Behema, however, are the souls who do not have das and godliness to the same extent. Obviously, still a soul, it's not an actual animal. So we can say about animals they don't have das, but a soul has das, some level of das, but it doesn't have the same level as a soul that would be called the soul of man. They have some level. These are the souls of the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, who comprise almost all the souls in our generations. Meaning, we're of the lower stature of souls in these generations. So, once again, the godly souls, or the souls that are called the souls of man, are the ones that come from a higher level, and they have an introspective consciousness, which includes understanding and feeling and godliness. And the souls of animal, it's called the soul of animal, but we're still talking about a godly soul. We're not talking about an animal soul. We're talking about a person's soul, but it's a person's soul that's called the level of the soul of an animal. They have a consciousness of godliness, but it's not to the same degree as that higher level. They're from the lower worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. And that's basically where the souls of these generations come from. The Rebbe is going to develop this idea more and explain it more, but I see there's a question. Oh, no? Okay. The souls of Atzilus are exceptionally lofty, and they are very rare even in earlier generations, which we are calling the souls of man. Those are very rare, lofty souls. This does not mean that they, the souls of Zera Behema, are without intellect and understanding of godliness. Rather, although they do have intellect and understanding, comprehending and intellectually grasping the greatness of the blessed Creator from holy books and scholars, experiencing a deep comprehension and understanding of how God vitalizes and brings into being the worlds and all created beings, and how great His greatness is unfathomable. In other words, the souls of animal do have all of this understanding. They have an intellectual understanding of Hashem. They comprehend and grasp His greatness from the books that they learn and from the scholars that they learn from. They have a deep comprehension and understanding about how Hashem is bringing the world into creation and how His greatness is unfathomable. However, nevertheless, since these concepts are not actually felt and internalized within their souls so that it resonates soundly with their das, such souls are referred to as Zera Behema. In other words, what we're going for here is not just an intellectual understanding and grasping and comprehension, but that these spiritual ideas have to actually be felt by the person, experienced by the person. The Zera Adam, the souls that are at the level of man, they experience it, they feel it. It's a level of internalizing it, whereas the Zera Behema, it's not that same level. So now it's going to explain that a little bit more. Like an animal also possesses the spiritual powers of sight and hearing. It sees and hears. However, it doesn't understand what it sees or hears. And since it doesn't have any das, or das to a significant extent, meaning people see and hear, animals see and hear, but animals don't understand everything that they're seeing and hearing the same way that people do, because they don't have the das to comprehend it and to make sense out of it, to analyze it, to understand, and to feel it. So similarly, those souls referred to as Zera Behema, the soul, the seed of animal, do not have das and godliness. Since das is conscious awareness. In the Hebrew, you see in the footnote, it says, and if you look at the Hebrew side, the word is hargasha. Hargasha means actually sensing something. Regesh is a feeling. It's not just an intellectual understanding of something. They're actually feeling something. They're actually sensing it. So the Zera Behema, the level of the Behema souls, do not have that conscious awareness and sensing of godliness. They understand it, they comprehend it, whatever they can from people and books, but that sensing is not there. That takes place when the intellectual understanding becomes attached and becomes fixed within the soul, as if one actually feels godliness. In other words, how do we feel that awareness? Taking that comprehension, understanding, and attaching it and fixing it, establishing it in our soul. And then it could be ki'ilu margish, it says in the Hebrew, that then it could be as if one is feeling it. For das connotes a bond and a connection. In general, whenever the term das is used, it means bonding and connecting. That's why it's used to as a term for marriage. And in this context, das is connoting a bond and a connection to godliness, to the extent that a person is consciously aware of the divine presence. As in the verse, from my flesh, I perceive God. So it is as if one is actually seeing godliness. So again, the animal, the zera behema, the seed of the animal, that soul, the soul that's at the level of the seed of the animal, that soul does understand and can learn about Hashem, but to get to the point where it's actually sensing the presence of Hashem, or it's sensing and feeling godliness, that it doesn't experience it that way because it doesn't have that developed das. It does see, it does hear, but it doesn't understand what it sees and hears, similar to the way that an animal sees and hears, but doesn't understand completely what it sees and hears the way that a person would, because it doesn't have the ability to connect what it's seeing and hearing and understanding to its deeper levels. So das, which is this conscious awareness, the definition of it is when something that a person understands becomes attached and fixed in their soul. Like it matters, they're connecting to that idea, they're connected to that understanding, they're connected to that awareness at a very deep level. That's what das does. So the soul of a man, meaning the zera adam, the souls that are at the level of the seed of the man, that those souls do have this quality, and the souls that are at the level of the seed of the animal, those souls don't have this quality as much. It's not that it's missing. Das is in every neshama. We have, that's one of our 10 soul powers. It's not as developed, it's not as actualized. We can't use it as much, or we don't use it as much. The lower level soul, so to speak. Any questions until now?
Chaya?
Yeah.
So this ability, is this connected to the statement about Moshe imparting the quality of his soul? Is that a manifestation of that?
Well, we didn't get to that part yet. The Frierdiker was not talking about. He puts that out there, but he's not talking about it yet.
About Moshe imparting that quality of his soul? He's not talking about that yet?
Right. He's just talking about the quality.
Okay. But he's going to get to that?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, we're not going to get to it today, I don't think, but
okay.
It's the, yeah. Because remember, Moshe was the shepherd, right? So the shepherd means he's training his flock.
Okay.
We're going to get back to that, you know what I'm saying? But we're not, right now we're right thick in the middle of the definitions of these terms.
Okay, thank you.
We're in the thick of it.
But we all have the ability to touch that once in a while, that consciousness of godliness, that feeling of godliness.
Well, that's going to be because of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to get, eventually we're going to, in other words, yeah, that soul that comes into the world just to give the Jewish people the Torah and explain it to us and help us connect to it. So then that's what he helps us do. Eventually, we hope. Yeah. But right now we're just trying to define our terms. Any other questions? So let's go back into the text. So, so even though we're saying that das connotes the bond and the connection, like the pasuk says, "From my flesh I perceive God," right? But it's as if one actually sees godliness. He's gonna talk about not yet. I think in the next section is gonna talk about the difference between seeing and hearing, as also one of these differences with different levels of like connecting to something. That we connect to something we see much more than we connect to something we hear. So it's as if we are perceiving godliness, as if we can't actually see God, but like as if we actually see Him. That's how much this das enables us to connect to Hashem. So even though it's impossible to see godliness with one's physical eyes, nonetheless, this awareness of the divine presence is so concrete, it's comparable to a person who knows and feels the vitalizing nefesh life force within him. Meaning, even though we can't see godliness, when a person has this level of awareness, they're aware of Hashem the way that a regular person is aware of their neshama in their body, their life force in their body. Thus, even though one cannot actually see the nature of the nefesh, how and what it is, we don't see our souls, he nevertheless feels his nefesh, his life force, by seeing the vitality of his body, vitality that comes about from his nefesh. So like a person experiences his soul enlivening his body, even though he can't see his soul, but he experiences it. And therefore, when a person dies, the nefesh leaves the body is left like an inanimate stone, because it's what's bringing the vitality to the person. Even while a person is alive, the level of vitality of his soul is not the same at all times. Meaning, the person feels his life force, he feels his vitality, he doesn't see his soul, but he feels it, so he knows it, he's connected to it. And even when he is alive, there's different levels. For example, when a person is asleep, his nefesh leaves his body, right? It talks about how the main part of the neshama goes up and gives an accounting of their day to Hashem, and there's only a very basic modicum of life that remains in his body, right? His soul is connected to his body, keeping it alive, but his soul powers are not conscious. All his important faculties are not revealed as they are when the person is awake, right? Including, for example, the faculties of intellect, sight, and hearing. They're not functioning the same way as when the person is awake. They're still functionable, and there's still something going on. He's still alive, but when he's sleeping, it's not as actualized, I guess, or activated, maybe you could say. For this reason, in a dream, two utterly disparate things can become conjoined. And while one is asleep, it appears real and reasonable to him. I'm sure we've all had those kind of dreams, right? We're like, maybe we're flying or getting into a spot that is too small to get into, or whatever it is, like, doing things that are impossible in the dream, they're totally logical and they make a lot of sense and nobody's even like concerned about them, right? This is possible because during sleep, the light of the intellect does not illuminate one's consciousness and enable the person to discern the impossibility of those two disparate things coming together. However, upon awakening, the person is astonished that those incongruent things could conjoin in his dream. So that's like a more activated das. He can analyze, he can see, he can understand. This occurs because on awakening from sleep, the conscious functioning of the soul returns and illuminates his individual faculties. Right? So it's not his soul's consciousness was not as aroused or activated when he was sleeping, whereas when he was awake, he's able to have conscious thought and consciousness. Conscious awareness, das, of godliness operates in exactly the same way in the souls of Atzilus. It's sort of like, I guess what the Friedrich Rebbe was saying is it's sort of like they're awake, like the souls of Atzilus are awake all the time. They are conscious, they're constantly engaging in godliness. As it is written, from my flesh I perceive God, meaning the way that when a person's awake, they perceive their soul, even though they don't see the soul specifically, but they perceive their soul the same way. These souls of Atzilus constantly are in a state of like awakeness, perceiving God all the time. Even though no thought can grasp him at all, this refers to his essence, which is ungraspable. However, his existence can be and is known and felt, meaning it's true that we can't completely understand Hashem, and we have the, so like why, so the Friedrich was like saying, why am I saying that these souls can grasp Hashem when we know that nobody can understand Hashem? Because that is true. Nobody can understand Hashem. We're talking about that level we're talking about is the essence of Hashem. The essence of Hashem, nobody can understand and grasp at all. However, his existence can be known and felt. That's what we're talking about. The way that a person knows and feels the existence of their own soul enlivening their body, they're aware of it. You know, they just stop to think about it. They're aware of it. That's the moment you turn your attention to it. So too, these souls are constantly aware and conscious of the idea of the Hashem enlivening them, and they're totally aware of it. Are there any questions? Yes. Can you unmute yourself, please? You're still muted, Bubby.
Yeah, no, I just unmuted.
yeah.
I took a minute. I just want to know, during dream, I understood that the soul kind of leaves the body, and it's not, so I'm trying to put together the fact that, yes, we're not aware of it in sleep, because it's not, is it because it's not in us? In other words, if the soul is leaving the body during sleep, then we would not be aware of it.
Right. The soul is not completely leaving the body when we're sleeping. Just like the main part of the soul, there's still a part of the soul that's there, that's keeping us alive. So is what you're saying. The reason why, what you're saying is, it's not that when we're sleeping, the soul leaves the body. It's that we fall asleep because the soul leaves the body. So the result is that we're not as conscious of our soul. We go into another state of slumber. It's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. It's probably very accurate. So maybe when a person has a hard time falling asleep, their soul doesn't want to leave their body.
Doesn't want to leave. Okay, so
they're having too much fun connected to their body.
How is that compared to the animal, though? In other words,
no, I think that the Friedrich doesn't say this specifically, but it seems possible that he's comparing the godly, the Zera Adam, the seed of man's souls, to the people who are in a state of awakeness, and the Zera Behema souls to people who are in a state of some sort of state of slumber, where there's maybe, it may be a little bit more than full slumber, because then there's no awareness at all. But he's saying that there's a different level of when you're aware, when you're asleep, there's a different level. And he's also saying that there's a different level between the souls that are called people and the souls that are called man. He doesn't explicitly say the piece about the sleeping, but it might be connected somewhat. You know, he's drawing those ideas. Okay, so then we can understand some things about Hashem, and we can know and we can feel some things about Hashem, and then those things that we can, we're obligated to. Meaning, Hashem created us with a brain, and every part of us is supposed to serve him. Our hands are supposed to serve him, our feet, our stomach, right? Also our brain is supposed to serve Hashem. So even though, yes, we are supposed to do mitzvahs, you know, just because Hashem asked and Kabbalah us all, and we're just accepting, yes. And in addition, the brain is also one of the organs that Hashem created, and we're supposed to use it to serve Hashem too, which means that whatever we can understand, we're supposed to push ourselves to understand more and more and more in godliness. I suppose that's why we're all trying to learn this. So, to borrow an example used by our sages, we see that the worlds are comparable to a great body. This is a mashal, that's a famous mashal, right? That like the soul is to the person's body as the Hashem is to the physical world. Like Hashem is, so to speak, as if he's the soul of the world. So The worlds are comparable to a great body. They are alive and endure. Their vitality is from God's infinite light constantly flowing into them at every moment. This concept can be understood by all. However, when this concept connects with the person's soul so that he bonds with it and actually feels it as if he sees it, this is called das. Meaning a person can understand that idea, but if they get to a point where they actually sense it, right? Where they actually sense it, they feel it, it's as if he sees it. That's called as if he's seeing it. That's called das. When you know something so deeply that you are, it's not just an intellectual knowledge, it's also like an experiential knowledge. Like you just know it and you sense it and you feel it. That's where it's come into das. Das, remember, is the bridge between the intellect and the emotions. So it's going to have a little bit of both. It's going to have an understanding and it's also going to have a feeling. It's a connector. Regarding this idea that you could know, sense godliness, regarding this, our sages declare who is a wise person, one who sees what will be. This is from Pirkei Avos, which is, right, this is the simple intent is that one sees the future consequences of his conduct. However, Hasidus folk, that's like who's a wise person. The Hebrew is Harayas Hanala, one who sees what's going to come out of something else. Literally, one who sees what's going to be born. So, like that means a person who is mindful of the consequences of his actions. Basically, you know that's somebody who's called wise on a simple level, like right versus like impulsive or not thinking ahead or like that kind of a thing. Like somebody who realizes if I do this. It's like one of the things one of our speakers for the women's programs once said, I think it was Rivka Caroline, a beautiful thing that I use all the time, especially with teenagers, is the idea that have your future self, have your present self check in with your future self. Like, is what you're doing right now, is your future self going to thank you for it, or sort of be like, why did you have to do that and get me into trouble now, or like create this problem for me now? So like, have your present before you do something that's maybe not so wise. Have your present self check in with your future self and make sure it's okay. That's Rayas Hanayla. You see the outcome of the actions, right? That's the simple level. It's not so simple actually, but that's the simple level of that. The deeper level, Hasidus explains, what does this mean? However, Hasidus focuses on the term what will be, literally, which is what will be born, and explains that the phrase means seeing the genesis for the worlds from their origin, meaning recognizing where everything has come from. See what was born. The world was born. Where was it born from? It was born from Hashem. Meaning recognizing, seeing, feeling, sensing that the source of everything in the world is God. It is as if he can see with his actual eyes the emergence and creation of existence from absolute nothingness. Like that's what he's sensing, which of course is a very high level. If a person can sense at any moment that the world is constantly being created by Hashem and everything in the world is being brought into existence by Hashem, certainly it would affect the way that he behaved, right? And the way he thought and the way he felt. It's like a whole experience of life. It's a different level of like vibration, right? It's like totally new, like consciousness, level of consciousness. That's why the definition that the Friedrich was using for das is that idea of introspective consciousness, right? If a person is having introspective consciousness that Hashem created the world and the world is constantly being recreated by Hashem at every moment, that introspective consciousness of that like meditation really can help a person with every single thing, right? They're not going to get upset if somebody's mistreating them because this is being recreated. This is being created by Hashem. They're not going to get scared. This is being created by Hashem every moment. They're not going to, like whatever it could be, whatever, they're not going to get angry because they're not going to, whatever it is, right? They're not, it's like all this right now, this is Hashem is creating the world at this moment. This is being brought into creation by Hashem. And if they feel it and if they understand it and they sense it, then that's like a hug from Hashem at every moment. So again, so what are we saying here? We're saying that the Zara Adam, the seed of man's souls, are like from that level of Atzilus, and they have this introspective consciousness, which is called Das. They have this Das, that's an introspective consciousness that's developed. Everybody has Das, but like this is a developed Das, which they actually sense Hashem. And it's similar, it looks like it's a conscious awareness, and it's similar to being awake. It looks like the Friedrich was sort of comparing it to that. And the Zara Behema, the seed of animal, is not quite as much Das. Everybody has some level, right? He said everybody has some level, but it's not quite as developed or activated or deep or however, or conscious, however the words are. And that understanding that they have of godliness, which they do have understanding from their learning, from the teachers that they've listened to and everything else, there is understanding, but it's not felt in their souls. It's not experienced as a hargush, as the term. They don't actually feel that presence of Hashem or that awareness of Hashem deeply in themselves. Maybe we're saying maybe that was why the Friedrich brought this idea of sleeping. You know, there's still the soul powers are still present, but they're not as activated. Going back to what we learned last summer, right? That Libi air, my heart is awake. Ani Yashena, the Libi air, I'm sleeping, but my heart is awake. If you remember that teaching that we learned from Shira Sherman last summer, along that, you know, that idea that there is always an awareness, but sometimes that awareness could be in a concealed or state of sleep almost. So there are different levels of souls. Right now, this was like a zig a little bit, like the Friedrich was talking about Moshe not having a comma because Moshe's soul above is the same below, and he has this like total connection to Hashem, and obviously this level of Das was very present in Moshe. And then in the introduction it says, and as a result of this, Moshe was able to impart this quality to the Jewish people as well. We haven't gotten to that part yet of like how his being Zera Adam and having this very high level and everything else affected us yet, but we're like headed there. But right now we're just defining the level, like what is it? What did Moshe have? He had this level of Das, which is this, you know, this sensation almost of Hashem, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's, anyway, that's the end of this section of the maamarim. Are there questions?
Chaya.
Yes.
So this might not, so in the Amida, there's a paragraph about Hashem. Pardon?
Yeah.
Is mentioned 3 times, and I always wondered about, you know, like the balance of that, as opposed to Bina and Chachma.
You're saying why is
so?
that?
Is that connected to this?
You're talking about the bracha of Atachan in Adam Das. You gave man Das.
Right.
Is that
that's the one.
Right, because in it says Atachan in Adam Das, you've given mankind Das, Melamed Enosh Bina, and you've taught people Bina. Chanenu mi'itcha Chachma Bina v'Das. We've gotten from you Chachma, Bina, and Das. That sounds familiar, right? And then Baruch Hashem Chanein Hadas, who gives that, who. So that you're saying that paragraph Das is said 3 times, whereas Chachma is only said once, and Bina is said twice actually. So it's like Chachma is once, Bina is twice, and Das is 3 times. That's what you're talking about, right?
Right.
You are an astute observer of the davening, Debbie. That's a very good question. I don't have a very good answer to it. I could have a semi-educated guess if you want, but you know that in a certain way, Chachma is that spark, right? That beginning spark, and Bina is the development of that spark. And then Das is like we're learning now, right? This Das is not just the development of the idea intellectually, but like making it felt in the person itself, and eventually it's going to go into their emotions and actions. So in a certain way, it does seem like it's a stepped process. It starts with the spark of Chachma, and then Bina has to take the Chachma and develop it to the next step, and then Das has to take the Chachma and Bina and develop them both to the next step. So it sort of matches that it should be once, twice, and three times. I mean, in the Spheres, Chachma is the first, Bina is the second, and Das is the third. Like,
Right.
it's sort
Okay.
of, Das also has, like multiple jobs almost, right? Like there's this piece of Das that we're talking about now, which is that introspective consciousness. But a person can only get to introspective consciousness if they've already had something of Chachma and Bina. Like, what are they being conscious about? What are they being introspectively conscious about?
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be something they're working with. So I imagine that would be the Chachma and Bina, and that's that, Chachma and Bina give birth to Das. Das is the combination of Chachma and Bina. Das also gives birth to Chachma and Bina itself. Like we've talked about before in class, like this idea of Das Elyon and Das Tachton, up supernal Das and lower Das, right? That supernal Das is the source for Chachma and Bina, and then the lower Das is the combination of Chachma and Bina, bringing it into the emotions and feeling, and then being able to like actually experience something on the emotional level. This, what the Friedrich was talking about here, is very specific. It's the very specifics of this introspective consciousness, where a person is connecting deeply to the ideas that they're learning to the point where they feel it. The Friedrich talks about this idea often in his maamarim. I mean, I don't know often. I'm saying we've come across it before, I think, in this class even, that this idea of like actually connecting to the point where a person is experiencing something. It's very high level. It's like really requires a lot of effort. But he's going to go on to explain like that was also part of the receiving of the Torah. But so knowing something at the level of Das is different than knowing something just at an intellectual level or even just at an emotional level. It's really the combination, right? Okay. Introspective consciousness in English, there's no really good translation. That's what it says in the footnote, right? But introspective consciousness kind of has both of those flavors, because introspection carries with it a sort of an emotional intelligence as well as an intellectual intelligence. I would think. I'm saying just even the English words really combines it.
So when you say that Das gives birth to Chachma and Bina, you said that there are two different levels of Das?
Yeah, the higher level of Das is usually called Keser. It's more like,
okay.
But another term for that is Das Elyon. It's like this consciousness from a supernal perspective, like from a godly perspective, from the source of the soul, versus as one of the soul powers. It's like the original knowing, maybe, before it comes into intellectual consciousness. Like the source of where that knowing is coming from. Any other thoughts or questions? No, I've lost the page here. Any other thoughts or questions?
Hi, I have a question. When we know something with our mind and our feelings, that doesn't necessarily mean that it goes into the action phase, does it? Or does it? Feeling it?
Well, maybe not always, but conceptually it's ready, it's poised for action. Like in the spheres, there's different connecting points, right? It could, right, it maybe not. There's like there's the three intellectual three intellectual points, the three main emotional points, and then there's the four lower emotional points of the spheres, which are the spheres into action. It doesn't always have to, but like Das is very compelling, you know. It requires work still, but Das is very compelling because there's like a real right. Then you need to get that. Then you need to take action after that. You need to bring it to action after that.
But the feeling aspect is what allows it to go into the action part. When we're feeling.
Well, that's when the. I mean, I suppose. I mean, in this context, right now, all we're talking about is that awareness and the sensing of godliness. Well, it's going to develop this idea further later on, which this mind will take it in its own way, but I mean, in theory, a person can do something without feeling it, but they have to at least, like it says in Tanya, right? There's enough there has to be enough connection to get yourself to do it, but that doesn't mean that connection is fully developed yet. That's a separate idea. It's not really what that Friedrich was talking about right now. Right now, he's really just focusing on the sensing of godliness, of understanding godliness to the point where a person really senses it. When they really sense it, I don't know if a person's if it's possible to not have a repercussion from that. Like I don't know if it could just stop there. If a person really sensed, if they brought it into an internal level, if it stays not internalized, that's when it may not affect their action. I mean, that's the whole idea of emunah not affecting a person's actions, of faith in God, because it's not internalized. The Mimer will touch upon that as well, but that's like the idea. A person could believe in God, but it doesn't have to affect their actions. Once a person has internalized this, then
what do you define internalize?
Well, this is going to be. Well, Das helps a person to internalize it. That's the point. Developing a person's Das helps one to internalize it. So it's an intellectual understanding and a sensing as well. I mean, we as Hasidim would say this is what Hasidus does. Hasidus is a intellectual understanding of godliness and also I don't want to say an emotional understanding because that's not exactly the word. That's not the right word, but it's like a feeling connection to godliness too. Hasidus develops a person's learning. Hasidus develops a person's das because it speaks to both parts of the soul.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, so it's not this or this. It develops both, and that's why we have a rule that we say, learning Hasidus must make a person more refined. Like it's impossible for it not to make a person more refined.
Mm-hmm. So it obviously does affect the feelings.
Yeah.
That causes the change in behavior. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
A person can do something even though they have no feeling for it, right? It's like an action without a feeling, but it's more meaningful for the person. And also if the feeling involves another person, the recipient of that action, it's much more meaningful if it's done with feeling. Any other questions?
A technical one. In the footnote on page 63, where the quote about who is a wise person, and you said that was from Pirkei Avos. In the footnote, it says Tamid 32b. So maybe I don't really know all the different sources.
I could be wrong. It may not have been from Pirkei Avos. It might be from. Well, it's obviously going to be from where they said, but I wonder if it's also in Pirkei Avos. Thank you for the correction.
Oh.
I will try to look it up.
I thought maybe they were connected or something.
They, I'm not sure. It's a very, I mean, they're very similar quotes in Pirkei Avos about Ezel Chacham, but maybe this one is not from Pirkei Avos. So thank you for the correction. Yeah. Okay, whatever. I'm not sure. I have to look it up. But obviously it comes from there. So if that's where it says it comes from, then it comes from there. Okay, I think we'll call it a morning. Well, we'll call it a class anyway for this morning. All right, so everybody have a wonderful day and wonderful week. We should say that the wish before Shavuos is that we should receive the Torah with joy and inwardness. Next Tuesday is actually Shavuos, so we're not going to have class on Shavuos. But it is a good idea if people can to go to shul. I don't know how people are feeling with Corona and everything, but to go to shul to hear the 10 Commandments being read. And when you hear it, to like re-accept it, as if you're standing at Mount Sinai, you're re-accepting the Torah. So
we're lucky our class synagogue's outside.
yeah,